Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of Market Monday. So I want to talk about a couple of topics today. The first being the outlook of Magic the Gathering in early or I guess mid-winter of the 2019-2020 season. This is typically when we start to see Magic cards move, when tax returns start trickling in, and then it has a lot of steam until about April. So we're going to look at the market indicators, see what 2020 looks like. 2019 was crazy. It's one of the highest gains I've ever seen. There's just metrics across the board. You name it, from Commander to Modern to Standard. They all had huge gains in the various different formats. And then we saw one of the coldest or coolest holiday seasons I've ever seen, or summer leading into holiday seasons that I've ever seen in Magic the Gathering, with all the formats basically losing everything they gained. A little bit had to do with Pioneer entering into the mix, but Pioneer shouldn't have affected formats like Commander as much as the market crash suggested. So now we're in early 2020, and it does seem to be that prices are finally stabilizing from the low. So you can look at basically any of the formats again, from Commander to Pauper to Standard to Modern, and it looks like, well, Modern still is going slightly down. That has to do with a lot of the tournaments shifting over to Pioneer, but I'm expecting that Modern is going to finally stabilize off, and then we can start to see some gains in prices. I think Modern's in a pretty bad shape right now, with just a couple of decks really dominating, not a lot of different strategies or diversity right now in Modern, and we'll have to wait and see what they do with bans. I am thinking that the bans that are coming out next are going to be Once Upon a Time for Modern and Dig Through Time in Pioneer. They need to quit creating cards with the word time in it. Every time they do that, it seems to be pretty busted and needs to be banned. So anyway, that's my two guesses. If you have any of those particular cards, I would suggest getting out of Dig Through Time or Once Upon a Time, as I think those will be the next on the chopping list for their respected formats. I think right now that Standard is okay. We'll look at that in a second here. There are still some Boogeyman cards in Standard, but nothing like Oko, and I don't think they want to touch it with easily 10 to 15 decks that are playable, as we can consider like Tier 1 decks. Alrighty, so let's look at the price EV right now concerning Theros. Theros had one of the worst EV crashes we've seen. From the release of Theros on week 1. I think that this has to do with a number of factors. I think that Wizards of the Coast is finally, through distribution, have sheared up some of the problems we were having with a lack of supply with that early wave 1. All of my distributors were stocked full of Theros this time around, and there wasn't shortages like we've seen with War of the Spark, and some even Core 2020 had shortages, which is just nonsense how little that set sold. So this time around, I think that all the stores are able to get booster boxes, resupply after that week 1, and that way the mass box openers are able to get their supplies, the people are able to draft and do leagues and sealeds and everything like that, and we saw the market get saturated with Theros Beyond Death. That's A. B, collector's editions seem to be a lot higher quantities than from Throne of Eldraine. And with not having the Brawl cards that you randomly get out of the Throne of Eldraine collector's edition booster boxes, the Theros, I guess Theros did have lands though, but still it seems like there was a lot more of the rares and the mythics that got flooded into the Theros Beyond Death supply, and that also did crash the price of cards quite significantly. People did open those collector's edition booster boxes. Collector's edition booster boxes are still available from distributors. Now, let me give you a comparison of Throne of Eldraine. Throne of Eldraine, we were allowed, my local game store, we were allowed to get 8 of them from our pre-order. So I was only allowed to snag up 8, and I wasn't able to buy any more Throne of Eldraines until recently, when there was from my understanding, they didn't sell well overseas. So in Latin America and Europe, a lot of the distributors there sent theirs back, and then they were redistributed through the United States distributors, and that's how we were able to get more Throne of Eldraine Collector's Edition. But that was a long gap in between that initial, where Throne of Eldraines were going for about $300 on eBay, and then they slowly declined down to now I think they're barely going above cost, around the 200s for Throne of Eldraine. Theros looks like either people, it just looks to me that the supply was much higher. I was able to get 11 or 12, I believe. So what is that? Almost, a quarter more than I was able to get before. And then the supply has been nonstop. I can still buy them from all 4 distributors. They have them in stock that I use, and it's reasonable prices. It isn't like we saw with Throne of Eldraine. Once they did get back into the mix, that distributors were hiking the price up in the 200s. I'm still able to get the Theros Beyond Death Collector's Edition for about 180 on average through the different distributors. So that gives you kind of an idea of the supply of Theros Beyond Death. I think that they did print more, at least of the collector's editions, than they did with Throne of Eldraine. So I think that that's also going to set a precedent for what is it next set? Ikoria is going to have a very bear market when it comes to people picking up collector's edition. I don't think that people are going to be pre-ordering them as much or really sitting on them as much as they did with Theros Beyond Death or Throne of Eldraine, because now people have been burned with the collector's edition booster boxes. If you actually check eBay, they're around the price that I can get them at distributors. So people are selling them for about $200. After fees, they're breaking even. So it's either distributors fronting as stores on eBay, or people that are just trying to unload them and break even that are now selling their Theros Beyond Death collector's editions. So a little bit of a shameless self-promotion. If you do want these Theros Beyond Death collector's edition, we have plenty available that I can order through our Patreon. What I do is I do a subscription-based service, and you can get booster packs, booster boxes, sealed product, any sort of sealed product, card accessories, things like that, by just being a patron at distributor cost. So it's just money up front. All basically you get the same cost that I would get if I was ordering it from my store, and then I ship it to you. So anyway, there's a little bit of shameless self-promotion for the Patreon. So anyway, let's go back to Theros Beyond Death. Theros Beyond Death also didn't seem to get a lot of people excited, but that shouldn't have made the market crash as much as it did. I actually think there's a lot of goodies in Theros Beyond Death. It's just terrible to try to compare Theros with Throne of Eldraine and War of the Spark, and even Core 2020, that were jam-packed full of power. I haven't seen 2 powerful sets like War of the Spark or Throne of Eldraine for a long time. And then if you go back to Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Legions, those had the shock lands, and shocks are the new fetches when it comes to Pioneer. So the demand for shock lands are huge for that format. So those sets, of course, are going to be looked at and purchased more than the Theros Beyond Death. So I think that is what Theros Beyond Death has going for it. There's the million-dollar question. Is the amount of supply from the collector's edition booster boxes going to offset the ability for Theros Beyond Death to actually climb back up to a reasonable EV? And right now it is looking like it's slightly going up. It went from 60 to 61 to 65 to 66 on the market price, whereas Throne of Eldraine continues to climb. I think a lot of this still does have with Pioneer pressure and standard pressure with a lot of the best cards in Eldraine at the moment. And then we're also seeing like War of the Spark climbing, and Ravnica Allegiance climbing, and Guilds of Ravnica also climbing. But this is very typical for a rotation season. This is when you're going to see these sets climb until about March, April, and then they're going to have their inevitable decline, especially with the Challenger decks coming out. Something to note too is it does seem to be that some of these older sets like Dominaria and Ixalan are also starting to climb. So Pioneer really is starting to put the pressure on these sealed, the EV of the sealed boxes, and even like things like Amonkhet, which was a joke a few months ago, down to the $35 to $40 range, is up to about 55, and with the invocations up to 66, and even Our Devastation now at 64 or 74. One of the other really good things is the climb from Oath the Gatewatch. This is actually looking like a legit set to open up. I can still get boxes for around $100 for this set. Shadows in Innistrad is still pretty stagnant, but Eldritch Moon has been the big climber, and some of these boxes are still pretty available. The one Pioneer set that still looks terrible is Dragon's Maze. It actually still has been falling in price. The shock value, though, comparison-wise, has been increasing to Dragon's Maze, but it still is a pretty terrible buy. Original Return to Ravnica looks to be one of the better sets right now in the Pioneer Age, and these I think can still be had around $100 if I remember correctly. Anyway, so there's kind of an outlook of the sealed and the EV of the booster boxes. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the market is doing. So if we come over here in standard, the market looks pretty flat, which is good. It was going down and now it's flattened out. We have cards like the Embercleave that have had significant gains, the Castle Ardenvale, which has gone up a ton, Castle Octoy, and I'm kicking myself for both of those. I just really thought that Throne of Eldraine would continue to be opened and opened and opened and opened and opened, and we'd see these rares even go down further. But it looks like now Throne of Eldraine is not being open, and we have all of the castles that are really starting to climb, and even cards like Tobran are even starting to go from there, $2 now to $3 and fastly approaching $4. Fabled Passage is climbing, so that's the big news is Throne of Eldraine has stabilized and is now going up. I think that these are all pretty good pickups. I'd pick up sealed boxes of Throne of Eldraine though, or just crack boxes at that EV because you would be net up EV. Currently, I can get Throne of Eldraine boxes for $77 a piece. So if you're to crack them, you get about $15 to $20 worth of excess value, and you got to make sure you can actually make that up with the fees, but that's a pretty good margin when you're looking at the TCG market price versus the box EV. So let's look at Modern. Modern does look like the weekly changes are down for whatever reason, but the daily changes, it does look like it has stabilized off. For the longest time, you'd only see casual cards in this mix, but when you see cards like Tarmogoyf for Misty Rainforest or Dark Confidant start to go back up, Verdant Catacomb, those are a good sign for the format, meaning they finally found their low and possibly starting to go back up. The buy list spread is still pretty decent for Card Kingdom, but down to $65 compared to the market price of $66. That is still a little bit of a concern for like fetch lands being of course, the most popular in both EDH and in Modern. Those are typically cards that go up over time if the format is healthy. And then it also looks like it's not a lot of the mainstay cards in Modern that are going down. These are more of the casual stuff like Exquisite Blood, Helix Pinnacle. Those are more of the commander cards that are going down. Look at Pioneer. Pioneer is still doing very strong with cards that are spiking up in value due to new decks like Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Kalidas is starting to see a lot more sideboard play, and we are even seeing other cards like the Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which is an uncommon, go up to about $1.60. Ulamog, Emrakul, Ugin, all those cards also going up. And one of the breakout cards with the mono red decks running Abbot of Carol Keep is going up in value as well. Pauper also seems to be in a decent place. For the longest time, you've seen it slide, but cards that are, mainstays in this, like Gorilla Shaman, seem to be stabilizing off instead of going decline. We even have like the Deprives and those type of cards are going up, and even lots of these common Pauper cards have stabilized off and are going up. So that's the good news for that. So let's take a look of where the trends can go. Well, first of all, I think that Pioneer is still really hot. There probably needs to be something that will shake up the format because of the Pioneer Grand Prix and the Players Tour Grand Prix have all given a lot of kind of data for that, and it does look like Dig Through Time. If we actually look at Grand Prix Phoenix and we look at the Players Tour Phoenix here, we look at and we see that Dig Through Time is the 6th most played card. It was in 62% of the decks, and it really is the card that is breaking the inverter deck. It also does see play in the Lotus Bloom or the Lotus Storm combo, and I think that Dig Through Time is going to go. So once that goes, though, you'll see a Dimir inverter combo go down to a tier 3 deck. It's not going to be playable without Dig Through Time. I've given this a go. Dig Through Time really does smooth out your the bad draws, or when you have to play the control route. The Dig Through Time does a great job of exiling your graveyard and allowing for that Inverted True Thassa combo to happen a lot easier. So I'm surprised this one's actually running 3 of. 4 of seem to be really good in the deck. So Dig Through Time is a problematic card. I've said it since the beginning that it eventually would need to be banned, and it's only a few sets later that we're actually seeing that happen with plenty more ways to dump cards into the graveyard from Theros. Added some pretty premier cards to do so, and we've had plenty before in Pioneer to do so. A lot of people just thought that possibly not having fetch lands would keep cards like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise down, but I think this deck is still playable with Treasure Cruise, but it's going to be not nearly as consistent. So I think that's what they're going to go with right now, is a ban through Dig Through Time. Other than that, it still is the Lotus Storm is a very, very popular. See if we can find a deck list here of the Lotus Breach. So Lotus Breach is a very popular deck that has really broken out because of Underworld Breach. Again, Dig Through Time is in this deck. You could see some cards like Pour Over Pages start to increase because it was only has been printed twice, once in this theme deck and once just in Shadows of Innistrad, I believe, is where it was at. And an uncommon out that is that old now and sandwiched in between sets that had expeditions I think those uncommons can definitely start to go up. Another card that I definitely should keep your eye on is strategic planning. Being a common, we've seen a Boreal Grazer go up to about, yeah, it's climbing. This is pretty crazy. Oh, I guess it was in Commander 13, but the supply is still pretty low from this. I mean, it was just in the Portals 3 Kingdom and Commander 2013 and a common in Hour Devastation. And it's pretty crazy how these can actually be worth value. Card Kingdom is paying 28 cents for them. So it's something that you should definitely go check your bulk bins at your store. You can pick these up for a nickel a piece. You can play the good old Card Kingdom shuffle, sell them to Card Kingdom, and then actually turn them into, more valuable cards. So this card is also seeing a lot of play. The same thing can be said for some of these commons like the Boreal Grazer. You should be keeping your eye on, in the Vizier of the Tumbling Sands. You be searching your bulk bin for those, because this deck is legit. So I think that they should just, again, my advice for the format would be to ban Dig Through Time, and possibly even the one card that's getting taken out of this deck might be enough to push this deck back a bit. Of course, we're still going to need to, but from what I've heard, I've actually not played against this deck or played this deck much, is that there are cards like Leyline of the Void that do pretty decent versus this strategy, that if you can exile the graveyard early on, that it's hard for this deck to recover. And there are other spells like not Rule of Law, but the White Enchantment that replaces it, that also can be pretty frustrating for this deck to fight through. So I don't think that this is as busted as the Inverter, because the Inverter gives you a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. You have to take care. You always have to worry about the combo going off, or it's more of a control-based deck, and they can just control you out and then eventually just beat you down even. I actually have won a game with the Inverter of Truth just attacking in, whereas this is just a one-trick pony where it does need to establish the combo and then go for the combo. And there are ways to shut it down. So I definitely would, what is it? Is it Blood Sun or some of those cards, or Dampening Sphere? Things like that really do seem to be issues for this deck to fight through. It's a lot easier to shut these down on the sideboard. All right, so if we actually go back and we look at Standard 2, Standard does seem to be in pretty decent shape. With the market, it does seem to be that the Azorius control is moving ahead. I mainly blame Mono Red for that, because it's got the best matchup versus both Mono Red and Team Reclamation. But this is still a format which I don't think is solved. Azorius is something that is starting to pull ahead, like I said, but there could be anti-decks that start to come up versus this deck. We are in an Oko. I know it looks pretty problematic with 25% of the decks. There haven't been a lot of big tournaments to give data here, though. We have just a bunch of standard challenges and standard leagues. And then some of these Magic Fests, but there's not a lot of data from these Magic Fests here. But it does seem to be, again, that blue is, I don't know, blue is, now I'm looking at the data here, blue is looking quite problematic. I wonder if they are going to try to switch things up. I highly doubt it, though. I highly doubt that they'll do another banning in Standard. It's just been plagued with bannings, and yeah, anyway. But it does seem to be you have about 2-3 months for Standard to continue to increase. So definitely take a look at these particular decks, and I would get on the low supply cards. So for example, here Dream Trawler could be definitely a card you could go up. I've seen decks run as many as a 4, and else with Conqueror's Death. These are definitely cards that as Theros quits being open, these should be the first cards that go up in value. Shatter the Sky is another one that is going to go up very, very quickly. We could also see Teferi start to make a recovery, but you got to think too that Challenger decks are coming out, and Teferis could be in those Challenger decks. So keep your eye out for those and the spoilers for those. Anyway, that's basically all I've got for today with the Market Monday. I think the market's really just stabilizing from the loss of local game stores. There has been rumored that over 100 stores closed their doors in 2019 and in the early 2020, and we're kind of seeing the problem with the supply chain there as well. That's why it causes like a domino reaction. When distributors are stocked full of stuff and don't have a way to sell it, they lower their prices, and then people end up picking up for that lowered price, and that lowered price then gets reflected into the prices of the cards as the people open up the booster boxes. And I really still think, like I said earlier on, it's a collector's edition from the Theros that was just a much higher supply that pushed a lot of supply into the Theros singles market. But anyway, there's a lot of other concerning things like reprints. We don't know how mystery booster boxes are going to react. I'm going to do a video about unsanctioned, why I think unsanctioned is a bad purchase. You can come and check that out on my second channel. We'll have that up tomorrow on the Rogue Market. The TLDR for that is going to be that the unsanctioned is not a limited release. It is print to demand. They're going to print it as long as people buy it. And so that is a set that I highly suggest you stay away from because there won't be any. I mean, the lands will go down to the value of the box set, and then maybe even a little bit less as those are, people actually crack them for the lands because no one really cares about the joke cards. You can actually go in the reference like unglued and unstable and all those, and those cards aren't worth anything. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Head over to the Rogue Market channel for that overview for the mystery packs, the challenger decks, and the unsanctioned, which I'll be doing tomorrow. Thanks for watching.